Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a conversation with Representative Chrissy Houlahan. She offers her thoughts on how policy decisions on Capitol Hill will affect military recruiting of women and minorities. Plus, the future of women's healthcare in the services. Houlahan addresses the ever-changing quality of life issue. And later, voice-controlled drones? Primordial Labs offers a look at how their Anora software can modernize the battlefield. Coming to you from Washington, D.C., it's the latest in news and analysis, from the Pentagon to the platoon, here on Defense News Weekly.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for sitting down with us. Last year you were a key member of the House Armed Services Quality of Life panel. This year you're taking over as ranking member of the Personnel Subcommittee. So yep. That same issue, what do you see as the top priorities this year on the personnel side, especially given all of the stuff that you and the committee did accomplish last year?
So I think that the remainder of the work that was sort of left behind is some of the top priorities of the Quality of Life panel, transitioning now into the Military Personnel Subcommittee. Some of those had to do with housing allowances, and some of them had to do with some of the issues of women's health as well. I think that my biggest job is to make sure we stay focused on quality of life in the Military Personnel Subcommittee panel, and not on extraneous conversations about wokeism in the military, as an example. I think sometimes those are red herrings, not even sometimes, but always. And I think it's really important that the work of the Military Personnel Subcommittee be about military personnel and their quality of life and the quality of life of their families as well.
That was part of the interesting relationship last year with that special panel. It really did get to just dive into those issues, while the Personnel Subcommittee did get into some of those fights over woke policies and whatnot. Do you think there's an ability to bring that work from last year over and keep it focused really on those, as you said, those outstanding issues?
I believe so, yes. It's certainly going to be our mission, and I know that I've already had early conversations with Representative Fallon, who's going to be my colleague on the other side, the chairman of the subcommittee, and I believe that his intent as well is to continue that work of quality of life rather than the other work from past Congresses.
We got a chance to sit down with him just a couple of days ago and talk about his priorities. He said that recruiting was going to be really the main focus. I know that's something that you've looked at for a while and the committee has been looking at for a while. Talk to me about your concerns right now, though, with some of what you've seen with the new administration, some of the policies and the rhetoric about women in the military, minorities. I mean, do you think that there's any way to talk about that without getting into some of those fights? So
I am concerned, frankly. We are seeing a turn in the quality in terms of the volume of people who are committing themselves to a life in the military, and I think that we had turned the corner sometime last year in terms of recruiting, having less and less of an issue with each of the services meeting their recruiting goals. And I think that I do worry that with an elevated conversation about minorities in the military or women in the military, that will suppress people who are interested in joining. I have not just anecdotal evidence, but specific evidence that people who had intended on either going to the academy or maybe enlisting, who happen to be women, are making different choices than they would have. And that's tragedy. That's a tragedy. There are 51% of our population who are women. More than 20% of our military right now are women, and we expect that it would be more than 30% in the next 10 years who are women. And if women feel as though they're not welcome in a place like our military, then they have other choices to make and they have other options to go to. In my community, our unemployment rate is less than 3%, and so the military is competing with the civilian economy, and that's why the quality of life issues are so important to not just women who may be interested in enlisting or matriculating into the military, but everybody. And that's why it's really, really important that we keep the politics out of the military and allow them to be soldiers and sailors and airmen and guardsmen, guardians as well.
So, I mean, you're a veteran, you served. What are you telling these folks right now when they are? If there's a young woman who's interested in joining, she says, I have a lot of concerns about what I'm hearing. How are you advising them? What are you telling them?
It's hard. It's a hard conversation because I think that you can't be what you can't see, and I think it's important that we continue to join in numbers and make sure that our military reflects the face of our country. And so I do encourage people of all kinds to continue to join the military, because you can't make progress if you're not there, if you don't have a seat at the table. Listen, I served more than 30 years ago, back when there were fewer women in the military, and I knew that I was outnumbered in many ways, but I also knew that I couldn't expect things to get better if I wasn't one of the people who was there at the table. And so I think we just have to continue to press forward and continue to serve the country.
It's interesting. Representative Fallon, when we chatted with him, talked about that calling and wanting to appeal more to that, especially in the recruiting message, not just talk about the benefits and some of the stuff, but actually talk about the career calling, the value of that stuff. Is that still something that you think can resonate when we are seeing the force getting pulled into a more political conversation?
I do think that it's a special kind of person who raises their hand, who volunteers to be part of an all-volunteer service. And I do think patriotism is a significant part of that, and service is a significant part of that. That doesn't mean that we can't take care of people, that we shouldn't continue to take care of them, not only in their active duty life, and that it should be a competitive lifestyle, but also when they become veterans as well. And so while I appreciate that it's a special kind of person who self-selects to be in the military, that does not mean that we should not make sure that we're taking care of people. And so I struggle with conversations about recruiting and trying to recruit into what is a traditional group of people who traditionally join the military, and go deeper on that. I think it's important for us to go more broadly and make sure that the population at large understands the opportunities and experiences that a person can have when they serve in the military in whatever form they do. Right now, most people who are joining the military have military background, military family, military experience. A very large percentage of them do, but we need to make sure that we're getting to all of the people in the country to explain to them the opportunities and benefits of being part of the military.
So speaking of taking care of those families and those quality of life issues, you mentioned before that there's a couple of unresolved ones from last year. Housing has been a main issue. I know there were some reforms made to that and some issues, but what do you think is realistic for this year, and what do you want to see done in order to improve housing stipends, improve the housing situation for troops?
Well, right now, for whatever odd reason, we end up with giving, I think it's something like 90%, 95% of the housing allowance rather than 100%, and that's sort of bananas. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense to do that. I also think that we made great progress in the last Congress on a pay raise for kind of E1 through E5. We still need to make progress in the next level up in enlisted in particular to make sure that it's competitive. So I think that we are in agreement on that. Whether or not we're able to find the resources for that, because as you're probably hearing, there is a push both to increase the top line of defense spending, but also to decrease the top line of spending, and it's kind of contradictory. You're hearing on the one hand Secretary Hegseth say find 8% to cut, and on the other hand, just this week we voted on $100 billion more in the defense budget. And so those obviously contradict each other, and the question is always, where do you put that money? Is it towards, if we have more, is it towards yet another submarine, or is it towards making sure that we take care of our men and women in uniform?
And I know that some of the priorities that Secretary Hegseth has outlined where he wants to see that money go are more oriented towards either border security or equipment, drones, and the Virginia-class submarines. But last year you were part of the successful push to make sure that those increases did go to the junior enlisted. Do you think that the higher ranking enlisted is going to be a tougher push, or do you think that when folks really look at the situation, they'll say, hey, this was not just young guys not getting paid well or young men and women getting paid well. It's really the force needs to be better.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised at how hard it was to get that through. I was really surprised at the pushback that I got, frankly, from some of the senior members of the military on increasing pay for junior enlisted people. I understand that they have to make really tough choices on kind of where to put the resources and dollars, but there is no more important place to put in resources and dollars than in the men and women who serve us, and to have them feel as though they're valued and honored. I think when you talk about recruiting and retention, that's definitely really important. So you're right, it's going to be hard. It's an uphill battle, and it's surprisingly hard to ask for those kinds of things. But it's something that I won't relent on, because sometimes the response was, oh, well, we're helping with housing. Well, we're helping with, fill in the blank. You can't eat housing. If you can't afford groceries, you're struggling with other bigger things, and you're more likely to leave. Frankly.
Did you get a sense, because I remember you expressing that frustration last year as this was in real time, as that was going through, did you get a sense that it was a panic about resources, or was it just a fundamental block with some of the senior military leadership that pay raises just aren't as important as some of their other priorities? Or were you just not sure and left frustrated that you couldn't
whenever
get through?
we had a very extensive process through the Quality of Life panel, where we brought in kind of the senior brass of one form or another, senior enlisted as well, and we brought in a lot of people from various organizations that support and advocate for people in uniform. And the stories were contradictory. The data was contradictory, and that, I think, was one of the things where when we came back and pushed back and said, we hear you, you think that this is, that there's no problem with pay raise, but let me show you who we've talked to and what they've articulated, and some large percent of, in this case, in last year's cycle, of our junior enlisted on what amounts to food stamps, what we would have referred to as food stamps. It's outrageous. It's super obscene, particularly in some of the higher cost of living areas. People were really, really struggling. And so I think it's really important. That's my job. My job is oversight. My job is to make sure that we're allocating our very scarce taxpayer dollars and resources appropriately. And so I'll continue to work on that issue.
Well, and speaking of that oversight, you had initiatives in there dealing with daycare, medical care. How much of the work do you think this year, especially as you go into the authorization bill season here and some of the defense budget stuff, how much is just going to be making sure that they actually follow through on all the promises that you guys put out?
That is going to, there's the rub. It's one thing to authorize, there's another to allocate, right, and appropriate. And I think that's what we're going to have to be really forceful on, and making sure that we follow up and make sure that things really happen that we already sort of said were a high priority. And that will be important. And you bring up the issue of childcare. That's another one that I'm super, super passionate about. It's one of the reasons why I separated myself from the military, is such a long wait list and such high cost for childcare made it very, very hard to try to figure out how to literally make ends meet when we were, young parents. And 30-something years later, my daughter is now 33 nearly, it's still an issue. There are still long waiting lists. It is still unaffordable in some cases, and so we still have quite a lot of work to do there too.
When we come back, the conclusion of our sit-down with Representative Houlahan. She offers her thoughts on quality of life issues, including women's health care.
I know one of the issues that I expect, and I think you expect to come up in the authorization bill discussions, debate coming up here, is the issue of the Defense Department's old abortion access policy, which has now been removed, struck down by the new Defense Secretary, and the issue of IVF services that was also included in that. You've signed on to a measure with Representative Sherrill to try and get that back in. What do you think the prospects are here? Obviously, you've got a Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate. Are there any protections that you can sort of get into the system?
This is a little bit of a schoolhouse rock lesson. Elections have their consequences, and right now the Republicans have the majority in the House and the Senate and the White House. And what does that mean? That means that even if Representative Sherrill and I and many, many others are advocating for what I think is a basic right to be able to have health care wherever you're stationed, I won't be able to determine whether or not that piece of legislation, and she as well, gets to the floor for consideration, because the Speaker of the House is the one who determines whether we vote on things. And so, short of some sort of miracle, it's likely that we won't be able to have that piece of legislation come to the floor for a vote. But it's really important that people out there hear that there are people here in Congress, many, many people here in Congress, who very much believe in your right as a person either who is wearing the uniform or a family member to be able to travel for that care that you need. And this is something that's really, really important for people to hear. It's also important for people to hear that family planning is the choice of the family. It is not the choice of the government to do that. It's important to hear as well. This is not paying for abortions or any other reproductive care. It's paying for the ability to travel to receive care that you can't otherwise receive in the place that you are stationed. I grew up in the military as a young person. I was in the military myself. You don't get to choose where you go, but you should be able to make sure you avail yourself of health care wherever you are stationed.
So that's probably one that, as you said, is not going to be a point of compromise. Do you see other issues though, like the housing issues, like the pay raises for higher ranking enlisted? Do you think there is room for compromise on those? Because last year with the Quality of Life panel, you were working closely with Representative Bacon. Yeah. There was a lot of actual bipartisan work, despite all the politics up here, despite all the fights. So, exactly. I mean, do you see real opportunities to still be hitting those quality of life issues, despite some of the harsh rhetoric up here?
I do see real opportunities. I know that Representative Fallon and I and the other folks who serve on the military personnel subcommittee are very interested in continuing our work. It is going to be a difficult environment, though. You're seeing with the new presidency and the DOJ and all of those efforts, quite a lot of efforts to cut and to cut deeply. And I think you're seeing that, you'll see that as well in the military. And so it'll be our challenge to continue to elevate those things that are important, to make sure that we are, ready to fight tonight, and that we have the best military in the world, which we already do, but that we maintain that, and that's all about our personnel.
Okay. Last question for you, as you referenced those cuts. Quite a few federal workers look like they're on their way out, especially in the Defense Department. There's concerns about what that's going to mean. How much are you tracking that right now, and just what is your concern level as we wonder what exactly these cuts are going to be?
I got to be honest, it's pretty high. What I did in the military was I was an engineer. I worked up at the Hanscom Air Force Base area working on advanced plans and programs, things that were sort of future weapon systems, future communication systems, and I worked side by side with a lot of federal employees, a lot of civilians who did the similar job that I did. And the concept that these folks are the ones who may, and already are, getting terminated in one way, shape, or form, that will affect our readiness. That will affect, how vibrant the military is and how virulent the military is. And I think that that's one of the goals, my understanding is, of Secretary Hegseth's, is to make sure that we are a deadly force. And if you take away the people who know how to do the things, we are no longer a deadly force.
All right, great. Congressman, thank you so much. Looking forward to pestering you about all these questions as we move ahead. So.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
When we come back, our financial expert is back with tips on how to clean up your financial clutter. Stay with us. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union brings you tips on how to spring clean your finances.
Spring is the perfect time for a fresh start. You know the deal. Take a good look at your budget, all of it. Fixed expenses like rent and bills, daily expenditures, savings, and even fun money. Where's your money going? Does it have to go there? Cut out unused subscriptions. You know you have some. Find ways to keep more of your money. Reevaluate your daily habits like dining out or online shopping. Redirect those savings to a bigger goal like a vacation or growing your savings. Next, consolidate your debt. If you have multiple payments, consider refinancing or using a balance transfer to lower your rate and payment. This gets you major bang for your bucks quickly and puts breathing room back in your budget. Cleaning up financial clutter will help you regain control and give you a clearer and probably a more stress-free path forward. Just like cleaning your home, spring cleaning your finances will give you a fresh, renewed sense of your money management and a better outlook on your financial future. With a little effort now, you'll be ready to take on the rest of the year with a better budget, fewer debts, and stronger financial habits.
To get more coverage of military and defense topics, hop in your Fighting Falcon and pilot it towards militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more headlines. And to be the most up-to-date grunt in the infantry, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning, bringing you the most recent headlines. Lastly, if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And if you get your news by endlessly scrolling with your thumb, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, Primordial Labs shows off their voice-controlled drones. Don't miss it.
For a seasoned gamer, piloting a drone isn't a big leap, but the controllers the U.S. military uses to fly unmanned aircraft still take hours, if not weeks or months of training. But what if you could tell a drone what to do, just like if it were a person? That's what Primordial Labs is focused on developing. The company recently demonstrated the technology to control a drone with natural language at a park in Virginia.
For me to do it manually, it'll understand it, so I'll do that live, and then also verbally plotting points from the aircraft. Go to 125 feet, then move 50 meters north of target 21.
So doing all that with the sticks is a lot of work. He just told us to do a lot of things that would require a lot of manual engagement.
Lee Ritholtz and Adrian Pope, two former Lockheed Martin Skunk Works employees, co-founded Primordial Labs with the intent of developing technology that helps tackle large problems pervasive in human-machine interaction on the battlefield, such as cognitive overload, manpower requirements, physical workload, and training burdens. The company developed the software Anura, also the scientific animal order for frogs and toads, that allows a human controller to simply speak to the drone to get it to do what they want using gear already in units like push-to-talk radios and headsets.
In the past, there's been work done trying to apply voice to these systems. Oftentimes, they're voice commands, and they are really memorizing keywords, memorizing phrases. That's doomed to fail. That will never work. So you'll see when we start the demonstration, it is truly natural language. You're talking to it. You can say things in lots of different ways to express the intent.
The software is designed to be able to work on any platform or system. At the demonstration, Anura was integrated on board both a small Skydio quadcopter and one from Teal, both competitors for the short-range reconnaissance program in the U.S. Army.
Wherever we're needed to live, we'll find a way to fit in. And that's really one of the big value props we bring, is that we don't use any big black boxes. There aren't any LLMs being used here. We're not calling out to kind of any OpenAI servers. Everything is running locally, and it's because we own our pipeline.
While the original scope of the technology development was focused on unmanned aircraft, and the company has done a lot of development work with the Army's Program Executive Office for Aviation and in the Special Operations Command universe, that work has expanded. Primordial Labs currently has contracts with 4 program executive offices and 5 companies that include both air and ground platforms. Including working with potential candidates for the SRR program, Anura has also been integrated for demos on the micro-drone Black Hornet, which is the Army's soldier-borne sensor. And this year, the company is providing Army units selected for operational experimentation a minimum of 8,000 Anura licenses to support human-machine integrated formations testing.
There is one Anura, so even when we are using Anura for different applications, it's the same software. So every time we have a new application, we create a fork of Anura, and then we figure, is this something that has legs? And if it does, we work very hard to reduce the technical debt back to one piece of software.
For more on this story, head over to defensenews.com. For Defense News, I'm Jen Judson.
Well, that's all that we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.